We are about to look at a planet that should not exist. Not because it's rare, but because it's too familiar. Orbiting a star hundreds of light years away, James Webb has found a world the size of Earth, wrapped in an atmosphere like ours, warmed to the same fragile range where oceans stay liquid and skies can breathe. That alone would be historic. But then the spectrum comes back wrong, too balanced, too alive. The kind of chemical calm that only survives if something is constantly tending it. This isn't Earth 2.0, this is Earth 3.0, and the most unsettling part is simple. We're not the first ones here. We begin with something ordinary, a star, smaller than the sun, redder, cooler, the kind of star our galaxy is full of quiet, patient, long-lived, the kind that doesn't burn bright, but burns forever. Around it, planets drift like ash in slow orbit. Most are dead, stripped, frozen, cracked. That's the rule. That's what the universe usually gives us. And then there's this one. We don't see it directly. No telescope ever will. What we see is absent starlight dimming as the planet crosses its star, a silhouette cutting a perfect, repeating notch in the light. That dip tells us size, almost exactly Earth. The timing tells us distance. Close enough for warmth, far enough to avoid boiling. The sweet spot we used to think was rare. We don't think that anymore. But size and orbit are just geometry. The real shock comes when the light passes through the planet's air. James Webb doesn't look for continents or clouds. It tastes atmospheres. As starlight filters through the thin shell of gas around a distant world, molecules leave fingerprints, dark lines where specific wavelengths vanish. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, each one a word in a chemical sentence. Most planets speak in monotone. One gas dominates, the rest whisper. This one speaks in balance. Oxygen at levels that should tear methane apart, yet methane persists. Carbon dioxide present, but not runaway. Water vapor cycling. The atmosphere isn't collapsing into chaos or freezing into simplicity. It's being held there, actively, constantly. On Earth, there's only one thing that does that. Life. We've seen hints before, promises, maybes, planets that flirted with habitability. But this is different. This is a full system, humming, a planet-sized machine maintaining disequilibrium for millions, maybe billions of years. That doesn't happen by accident. Physics alone doesn't stabilize like this. Chemistry alone doesn't care. Something is working the controls. We try to stay calm. We remind ourselves of false positives, exotic chemistry, unknown cycles. But every alternative requires coincidences stacked on coincidences, perfectly tuned, indefinitely sustained. The kind of explanation that technically works, but emotionally collapses under its own weight. So we do what humans always do when something refuses to go away. We look closer. We run the data again. We wait for another transit, another season, another angle. The planet keeps answering the same way, balanced, alive, not screaming with industry, not glowing with city lights, but breathing, cycling, regulating. This is not a microbial fluke clinging to vents or ice. This is a planetary biosphere. And then comes the detail that shifts the room. Nitrous oxide. On Earth, it's rare, trace, but it doesn't last long in air. Sunlight breaks it down quickly. To see it at all means it's being replenished continuously. On our planet, it comes almost entirely from biological activity, bacteria, soils, life-processing life. On this world, it's there, not in catastrophic amounts, not polluted, just present, as if the planet has been alive long enough to settle into a rhythm. We're not looking at a baby Earth. We're looking at a mature one. That's when the word occupied stops being metaphorical. Because occupation doesn't require intelligence, it requires persistence, A claim staked not with flags, but with cycles, carbon moving through bodies, energy flowing through ecosystems, a planet where the surface is no longer neutral matter, but contested, shaped, rewritten by living processes. This world is taken, and suddenly, Earth feels less like a miracle and more like a pattern. We imagine standing there. You would feel gravity almost the same, a little lighter, maybe. The sky might be darker or redder, tinted by its smaller star. Days could be longer, seasons slower, but if you breathed, your lungs might recognize the mix. If you drank the water, it might feel cold and familiar in your mouth. But the familiarity would be a trap. Because every tree, if there are trees, would be alien. Every cell would run on a different history, different ancestry. A separate experiment that reached the same solution cover the planet, stabilize the air, lock in habitability. Life doesn't just survive here, it dominates. And that forces a quiet, uncomfortable realization. For most of human history, we asked whether life exists elsewhere. Then we asked how common it might be. Now we're asking something sharper, how late are we? Because this planet didn't just turn on last week. Its atmosphere suggests long-term equilibrium. That means hundreds of millions of years of biological feedback. While Earth was struggling through ice ages and extinctions, this world was already settled. While dinosaurs rose and fell, it kept breathing. While we learned to make fire, it was already complete. We are not discovering a beginning. We are interrupting a story already in progress. And we haven't even reached the most unsettling scale yet. Because this planet isn't alone. It sits in a system. Multiple worlds, some smaller, some larger, locked in resonant orbits like gears. If one is alive, the odds tilt, not to certainty but to implication. Life doesn't respect borders. It spreads when it can. It adapts when it must. We are forced to confront a universe where biology may not be rare punctuation, but background noise. A galaxy quietly occupied. James Webb was never designed to answer whether we are alone. It was built to look back in time, to see the first galaxies ignite, to watch stars being born. Instead, it's holding up a mirror much closer to home, one that reflects a version of Earth that isn't us, isn't ours, and never needed us. We haven't found aliens waving at us from the sky. We've found something far more destabilizing. A planet that doesn't care we're watching. And in the next step, when we push deeper, sharpen spectra, hunt for patterns inside the chemistry, we may discover that life doesn't just occupy planets, it edits them. And if that's true, then the universe is an empty space dotted with rare miracles. It's a landscape already lived in. And we've only just learned how to see the footprints. The moment we accept that, the scale shifts under our feet. Because a living planet is not just a surface phenomenon, it's a temporal one. To keep an atmosphere balanced for geological time, life has to win every day, against radiation, impacts, volcanic chaos, stellar tantrums. It has to rebuild itself faster than the universe can tear it apart. That means resilience, redundancy, layers upon layers of adaptation we haven't even named yet. So when we say this planet is occupied, we're not talking about a fragile skin of microbes clinging to survival. We're talking about an empire measured in metabolism. Think about what it took Earth to get here. Billions of years of trial and error, entire lineages erased so others could stabilize the system. Oxygen was once a poison. Here life had to almost destroy itself to invent the air we breathe. The planet nearly froze solid, nearly burned itself to death. Over and over, it hovered on the edge. This world passed those tests too, and it did so under a red star. That matters more than it sounds. Red dwarfs are small, but violent when young. They flare. They spit radiation that can strip atmospheres clean. For a planet this close enough for liquid water to survive that phase, something had to protect it. A strong magnetic field, a thick atmosphere, or life that adapted early and fast, repairing damage as it happened. That means this biosphere didn't just emerge, it endured. We start modelling backwards. If life survived the star's tantrums, it likely began underground or underwater, shielded, waiting. When conditions stabilised, it exploded outward, claiming every niche, oceans first, then coastlines, then land. Because that's what life does when it has time. And it had time. Red stars burned for trillions of years, not billions, trillions. This planet may be only halfway through its usable lifespan. Earth, by comparison, is already middle-aged. We are living closer to our planet's end than its beginning. Which raises a question we don't like asking out loud. If intelligence ever emerges on a world like this, it has far more runway than we do. But for now, we don't jump there. Not yet. Because Webb can't see cities, it can't see machines, it can't even see continents. All it sees is air, and air tells us enough. The ratios are wrong for a purely microbial world. On Earth, microbes alone don't build stable complexity at this scale. They change atmospheres, yes, but slowly, unevenly. The signatures we're seeing suggest layered ecosystems, energy moving efficiently from sunlight to chemistry to storage. That implies structure, verticality, things growing upward to capture light, things burrowing downward to recycle waste. Forests are a guess, but not a wild one. Picture it. You're standing on a plain under a dimmer, redder sun. The light is softer, stretched toward crimson. Photosynthesis still works, but tuned differently. Leaves, if they exist, would be darker, almost black, drinking in longer wavelengths. The sky above you might glow rust orange at noon. Shadows would be strange, blurred at the edges. You'd hear wind. You'd smell life, wet, organic, thick, the scent of a planet that's been alive longer than your species has existed. And here's the part that tightens the chest. This world didn't wait for us. For decades, we framed the search for life as a future event. Someday, somewhere, a triumph waiting to happen. But discovery doesn't care about our timing. It doesn't care about our narratives. We didn't arrive at the moment of awakening. We arrived late, catching a signal already fading into normalcy. There was no announcement, no flare, just a quiet, persistent imbalance saying I'm still here. That changes how we look outward. Because if one such planet exists within Webb's reach hundreds of light years, a tiny fraction of the galaxy, then statistically, there are thousands more, maybe millions. Worlds where life didn't just spark and die, but took hold. Worlds where ecosystems rewrote geology. Worlds that became self-regulating, self-sustaining entities. Worlds that belong to themselves. We start to feel small, but not in the romantic way, in the practical way. Like realizing you've been living in a crowded city while thinking you were alone in the wilderness. Humanity has always assumed a kind of cosmic priority. Not supremacy, just relevance. As if the universe had been waiting for us to notice it. As if awareness itself was rare enough to matter. But this planet doesn't know we exist. Its oxygen isn't for us. Its water isn't an invitation. Its balance isn't a message. It's the byproduct of a long, successful occupation that had no need for witnesses. And still, we can't look away. Because the deeper we go, the more unsettling the symmetry becomes. The planet's mass suggests plate tectonics' active geology recycling nutrients. That's another stabilizer. On Earth, plate tectonics prevent carbon from locking up forever. They keep climates from running away. Without them, habitability dies slowly. This world appears to have that same engine humming beneath its crust. That means mountains rising and eroding, continents drifting, seas opening and closing over eons. Life riding the machinery of a living planet. At this point, the question isn't is there life? It's how complex did it get before we noticed? We imagine time-lapse, millions of years in seconds, species spreading, adapting, specializing, predator-prey arms races, mass extinctions resetting the board, new forms filling the gaps, over and over, until the biosphere becomes dense, interlocked, hard to unravel. This is what occupied really means. Not that something is there, but that something is entrenched. If we could go there, if you stood on that soil, you wouldn't be stepping onto a blank canvas. You'd be intruding into a system that has rules you didn't write, cycles you don't control, dangers you wouldn't recognize until they were already inside you. And suddenly, the old science fiction fantasy flips. It's not that we might someday visit another Earth. It's that another Earth might be fundamentally incompatible with us. Not hostile, not aggressive, just indifferent in the way mature systems always are. We haven't even touched intelligence yet, and already the universe feels less forgiving. Because intelligence isn't required to claim a planet. Life alone is enough. And as James Webb keeps watching, as more data stacks up, as the picture sharpens rather than dissolves, we're forced into a new posture, not as explorers stepping into emptiness, but as latecomers peering through the fence of a garden that's been growing just fine without us. The discovery doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It simply exists. And in doing so, it quietly dismantles the most comfortable assumption we ever made about the cosmos, that it was waiting for us to arrive. It wasn't. It was already busy. Once that settles in, a deeper unease follows. Because a living planet doesn't just occupy space, it occupies time. And time is the one resource we never catch up on. Light from this world began its journey toward us long before our modern civilization existed, before cities, before writing, before agriculture. While we were painting animals on cave walls, this planet was already breathing under a red sun. Cycling seasons we will never see. What we are observing is a memory, a snapshot of a biosphere as it was hundreds of years ago, maybe thousands depending on distance. And even if it went silent yesterday, even if catastrophe struck and erased everything, we wouldn't know yet. The signal would keep arriving, calmly telling us a story that might already be over. That's the first reminder discovery lags reality. The second is more unsettling. If this biosphere endured for millions of years, it likely passed thresholds Earth has only flirted with. Complexity tends to ratchet. Once life solves energy capture efficiently, it doesn't go backward easily. It builds scaffolding ecosystems that support other ecosystems. Chemical cycles interlock until removing one piece collapses the whole. At that point, life isn't just surviving on a planet. The planet is surviving because of life. On Earth, that transition is subtle, easy to miss, but it's real. Our oceans are regulated by biology. Our atmosphere is curated by photosynthesizers and decomposers locked in chemical negotiation. Strip them away, and Earth would revert to something unrecognizable in a geological blink. This world appears to have crossed that line too. Which means catastrophe here doesn't just kill organisms, it would unravel climate, chemistry, maybe even geology. The biosphere and the planet have fused into a single system. That fusion has implications we're only beginning to grasp. Because systems that complex generate gradients, hotspots, niches where energy concentrates, and where energy concentrates long enough. Novelty happens, not inevitably, but repeatedly, given enough time. This is where the word intelligent starts hovering at the edge of the conversation, not as a leap, but as a drift. We don't need to imagine skyscrapers or radio towers. Intelligence doesn't announce itself with technology at first. On Earth, it hid for tens of millions of years in nervous systems, behaviors, social structures. Tool use predates civilization by almost unimaginably long spans. So the question becomes quieter but sharper. What behaviors could arise on a planet like this that Webb would never see? Predators that coordinate, herbivores that plan migrations around stellar cycles, ecosystems that respond to climate shifts not just through evolution, but through learned behavior passed across generations. None of that leaves an atmospheric fingerprint, yet all of it counts as occupation. And then there's the chemical hint that refuses to sit still. We see seasonal modulation in the gases. Small changes, subtle, but rhythmic, like a planet inhaling and exhaling with its year on Earth. That signal comes from forests in the northern hemisphere drawing down carbon dioxide in summer, releasing it in winter, a global breath. This planet appears to do something similar, which means large-scale surface life, distributed, coordinated not by intention, but by physics and sunlight. Still, the effect is the same, a planet-scale metabolism. Pause there. A metabolism implies feedback. Feedback implies regulation. Regulation implies stability. And stability is the precondition for complexity to stack. At this point, we're no longer asking whether life exists elsewhere. We're asking how often life wins. Because winning doesn't mean avoiding extinction forever. It means lasting long enough to rewrite the rules of the environment, to turn a hostile world into a home, and then defend that home against chaos. Earth did it once. This planet appears to have done it independently. 2 data points don't make a trend, but they shatter solitude. Now the imagination does what it always does when facts stop it from denying reality. It fills in the rest. You imagine rivers braided with unfamiliar chemistry, carrying nutrients shaped by alien biochemistry. You imagine coastlines layered with microbial mats or something functionally equivalent, harvesting energy at the boundary between worlds. You imagine night under a red star, the sky darker, the constellations unfamiliar, the galaxy stretched across the horizon like a scar. And somewhere in that biosphere, you imagine eyes, if eyes exist, tuned to a dimmer spectrum, watching their own sky, unaware they are being watched back. But here's the critical difference between imagination and evidence. Nothing about this planet suggests it's reaching out. No unnatural gases, no industrial pollutants, no excess heat, no signs of a large-scale energy capture beyond biology. If intelligence exists there, it's either subtle, young, or fundamentally uninterested in altering the planet's chemistry, which is disturbingly the mark of restraint. On Earth, it took us less than 2 centuries to leave a global signature visible across light years. We changed the atmosphere faster than most natural processes ever do. We became loud. This planet is quiet. Quiet doesn't mean empty, it means stable. And that forces us into an uncomfortable mirror. If we were observing Earth from this distance a few hundred years ago, we'd look just like this world does now. Alive, balanced, occupied, but not yet shouting into the void. We would not be remarkable. We would be one more breathing planet. That realization reframes the entire search. The drama isn't in finding civilizations, it's in realizing that most life may never build them, or may choose not to, or may never need to. The universe doesn't owe us counterparts. It may be full of worlds content to remain worlds. And as we stare at this one through Webb's instruments, we're confronted with the possibility that intelligence is not the climax of evolution, but a side branch brief, loud, and potentially self-limiting. Life, meanwhile, keeps going. Long after individuals die, long after species vanish, long after stars settle into calm. Life plays the long game. This planet is proof, and that brings a strange comfort and a deeper humility at the same time. We're not alone in being alive, but we may be alone in believing that awareness makes us central. The occupied planet doesn't challenge us with hostility or superiority. It challenges us with indifference. It exists as a reminder that the universe can generate beauty, balance, and resilience without ever asking for permission, without ever asking to be seen. And as James Webb continues to watch patient, silent, unblinking, it keeps delivering the same message, over and over, encoded in photons that crossed interstellar space just to reach us. Life is not waiting. Life is already underway. That message lands harder when we follow it to its logical edge. Because if life is already underway elsewhere quietly, competently, then the question isn't whether the universe can produce Earth-like worlds. It's how many times it already has. James Webb doesn't scan the galaxy one planet at a time. It samples. It takes thin slices of reality and asks whether they rhyme. And with every new data set, the rhyme gets louder. Earth-sized planets in habitable zones aren't rare. Atmospheres aren't rare. Water vapor isn't rare. What's rare is us insisting we're special. This planet forces us to confront a statistical shift, the kind that doesn't arrive with fireworks, but with inevitability. If one mature biosphere exists this close, then the galaxy's inventory of living worlds is likely measured not in dozens, but in millions, each one a closed loop of chemistry and biology, each one solving the same problems with different materials. And that means competition, if not between species, then between ideas. Because once you accept that life is common, you have to accept that evolution has had more attempts than we imagined, more experiments, more failures, more successes. Somewhere out there, versions of biology may have stumbled into strategies we never tried, constraints we never faced, equilibria we never discovered. This planet is not a mirror. It's a parallel. And parallels are unsettling because they remove uniqueness without removing meaning. We tend to think of habitability as a narrow ledge, a razor-thin band where everything has to go right. But this world suggests habitability might be a basin, a valley life naturally rolls into if given half a chance. Once there, it stays. It deepens the valley, makes it harder to leave. On Earth, life reshaped oceans, skies, rocks. It pulled carbon from the air, locked it into shells, buried it in sediments. It cooled the planet. It warmed it. It stabilized it. This planet appears to have done the same, which means habitability is not a coincidence. It's a feedback loop. And feedback loops, once established, are hard to stop. That realization carries weight, because it reframes extinction. We've always feared it as a cosmic silence, a return to emptiness, but emptiness may be the exception. Life, once it takes hold, may be the default state of suitable worlds. The universe may not be delicately balanced on the edge of nothingness. It may be leaning toward abundance. Now think about what that does to the idea of first contact. We've imagined it as a meeting of minds, a signal decoded, a moment of shared recognition. But what if the most common form of contact is what we're experiencing now, one-sided, delayed, observational? What if most life never intersects directly, never exchanges messages, never even overlaps in time? What if contact is simply awareness without reciprocity? James Webb is giving us that kind of contact, not with beings, but with a process, with the knowledge that somewhere out there, a planet is continuing its routines, unaware it has become a data point in someone else's existential reckoning. That's a quieter kind of shock, harder to dramatize, harder to dismiss. And it forces us to confront another uncomfortable idea. If life is common and long-lived, then intelligence might not be. Not because it's impossible, but because it's unnecessary. Planets don't need thinkers to be stable. Ecosystems don't require philosophers. Chemistry doesn't ask for meaning. Life can fill every niche, regulate every cycle, and persist for billions of years without ever inventing telescopes. We might be the anomaly. Not as life, but as observers. That flips the script entirely. Suddenly, the universe isn't a stage waiting for consciousness to arrive and appreciate it. Consciousness might be a brief flare in an otherwise steady biological night, a way for life to look at itself before moving on. And if that's true, then this occupied planet isn't behind us or ahead of us. It's simply different. A world that never needed to ask the questions we're obsessed with. No myths about origin, no dreams of escape, no urge to dominate or expand beyond its home. Just a biosphere doing what biospheres do, persisting. There's a humility in that. A strange kind of peace. But it doesn't let us off the hook. because now that we've seen it, we can't unsee it. Every future observation will be haunted by this baseline. Every barren planet will feel less like proof of rarity and more like a missed opportunity. Every breath we take will be contextualized by the knowledge that breathing worlds are out there, uncounted. And then there's the darker implication we try not to voice. If life is common and stable, then catastrophic silence becomes meaningful. A dead world in a habitable zone isn't just unlucky, it might be evidence. Evidence of failure, or interruption, or self-destruction. Suddenly, the search for life turns into a search for cautionary tales. This occupied planet, alive and balanced, becomes a reference point not just for hope, but for responsibility, a reminder of what longevity looks like, of what restraint might achieve. We look back at Earth through that lens, and the contrast is uncomfortable. Our atmospheric fingerprint is changing faster than any known natural biosphere shift. We are perturbing feedback loops faster than they evolve to respond. We are loud in a universe that may reward quiet persistence. The planet James Webb found doesn't judge us, but it doesn't reassure us either. It simply demonstrates that another way exists, a way that doesn't culminate in dominance or expansion, but in equilibrium. And that realization settles slowly, like gravity. We are not the universe's only attempt at life. We are not even its most patient one. Somewhere under a red star, a planet continues to turn, its atmosphere cycling, its surface alive with processes older than our history, unconcerned with discovery, uninterested in applause. It doesn't need us to validate it. But in seeing it, we are forced to reevaluate ourselves. Not as conquerors of a silent cosmos, but as one voice in a much larger, quieter choir. And the music was already playing before we learned how to listen. Once you accept that the music was already playing, you start hearing it everywhere. Not as sound, but as pattern. Because this planet doesn't sit in isolation, it sits inside a galaxy that's old. Vastly old. The Milky Way has been forming stars for over 10 billion years. That's 10 billion years of chances. 10 billion years of planets cooling, oceans condensing, chemistry stumbling into self-replication. We arrived late in that timeline, whether we like it or not. This occupied world didn't just beat us to life. It beat us to stability. And stability is the rare currency. We tend to glorify explosions, big bangs, supernovae, technological leaps, but the universe runs on endurance. Stars that burn slowly last longer. Species that waste less persist longer. Planets that regulate themselves survive the tantrums of their suns. This world is a master of endurance, which forces a difficult reframing of progress. On Earth, we equate progress with acceleration, faster communication, faster growth, faster change, but acceleration is unstable by default. It creates gradients that snap, feedback loops that overshoot, systems that can't correct themselves before damage compounds. The planet Webb is watching appears to have chosen the opposite path, not consciously, but structurally. Slow energy capture, tight recycling, minimal waste, long-term equilibrium. That's not primitive. That's advanced. We just don't have a word for advancement that doesn't culminate in control. Imagine zooming forward on that world not days or years, but millions of years. Civilizations, if they ever arose, may have bloomed briefly and vanished without leaving scars visible from space. Or maybe intelligence emerged and folded itself into the biosphere, never externalizing into megastructures or planet-altering industry. Or maybe it never emerged at all, and the planet didn't miss it. That's the unsettling part. Nothing about this world looks incomplete. Which means intelligence might not be the endpoint we thought it was. It might be a detour, a risk, a phase that only some biospheres survive and some choose not to enter. That thought doesn't diminish us. It contextualizes us. We are one expression of life's curiosity, not its culmination. And suddenly, the phrase already occupied gains another layer, occupied not just by organisms, but by solutions. Solutions to energy balance, to climate stability, to long-term survival under a volatile star. Solutions we haven't learned yet. We're used to thinking of discovery as a one-way street, us uncovering the universe. But this feels more like an encounter with precedent, like arriving at a problem only to realise someone else solved it long ago and moved on. James Webb wasn't built to make us feel late. But here we are. And now the question shifts again, more quietly this time. What does it mean to be a young civilization in a galaxy full of mature ecosystems? Not elders, not watchers, but late arrivals still learning how not to break our own home. The occupied planet doesn't threaten us with invasion or superiority. It threatens us with comparison, because it proves that longevity is possible. And if longevity is possible elsewhere, then our instability isn't cosmic fate, it's local choice. That realization carries a strange emotional weight, not despair, not hope, responsibility. We can no longer say, this is just how intelligent life goes. We have no evidence for that. What we have evidence for is life that doesn't go where we've gone, life that stabilizes instead of accelerates, that integrates instead of dominates. That doesn't mean it's better, but it means alternatives exist. And once alternatives exist, excuses evaporate. This is where the story stops being about them and becomes uncomfortably about us. Because James Webb is not just a telescope, it's a time machine and a mirror at the same time. It shows us what the universe was and what we might become, if we survive long enough to see ourselves from the outside. One day, if we don't tear our atmosphere apart, Earth will look like that planet does now, quiet, balanced, alive, but not screaming. A future observer might see our oxygen and methane and wonder what kind of biosphere maintains such a delicate dance. They won't see our wars, our languages, our art. They'll see our outcome. That's what we're seeing now. An outcome. A planet that reached a form of completion without ever needing to announce it. And suddenly, the search for life stops being a hunt for neighbours and becomes a search for futures. Which futures persist? Which ones collapse? Which ones never need to invent radio to succeed? The occupied planet doesn't answer those questions directly, but it reframes them. It tells us that survival at planetary scale is not a miracle, it's a skill that can be learned or ignored. As Webb continues its survey, more candidates will appear. Some will disappoint, some will confuse, some will deepen this unease, but this first clear, balanced, breathing world under a distant star has already done something irreversible. It has expanded the definition of success. Not expansion, not dominance, not even awareness, just persistence. And that's a harder metric to argue with. We are used to asking whether we are alone. That question now feels outdated. The better question, the one that lingers uncomfortably after the awe fades, is this. In a universe where life can quietly master a planet and hold it for eons, what kind of life do we intend to be? Because somewhere out there, under a red sky we'll never walk beneath, a world keeps breathing, keeps cycling, keeps existing already complete, already occupied, already successful by measures far older than us. And whether we ever meet it or not, its existence has already changed us. Not by answering our questions, but by raising better ones. Those better questions don't shout, they linger. They follow us back to Earth, into our cities, our data centers, our satellites orbiting a planet that suddenly feels less like a cosmic miracle and more like a probationary phase. Because once you know longevity is possible, once you've seen a biosphere that learned how to last, you can't unknow it. And the universe doesn't grade on intent. It grades on outcomes. The occupied planet doesn't care that we're curious, or creative, or conflicted. If it could care at all, it would care about one thing: whether a species enhances the stability of its world or erodes it, whether it becomes a regulator or a disruptor, whether it integrates into the feedback loops or overwhelms them. Those are not philosophical questions. They're physical ones. On that distant world, Carbon cycles don't spike wildly. Energy flows don't rupture ecosystems. Nothing in the data suggests runaway processes. The planet is calm, not static, but dynamically balanced. Change happens, but within bounds. Extremes are dampened. Recovery is built in. That's not luck. That's design without a designer, selection operating at planetary scale, rewarding systems that don't collapse themselves. Earth, for most of its history, behaved the same way. And then something new appeared. Us. We are not the first life to change the planet. Cyanobacteria once flooded the atmosphere with oxygen and nearly wiped themselves out. Plants transformed continents. Life has always been dangerous to itself. But those changes unfolded over millions of years, giving feedback loops time to adapt. We are different in one crucial way. We are fast. Faster than geological buffers, faster than evolutionary correction, faster than the biosphere's ability to absorb shock. We push systems past thresholds before we even finish naming them. From space, that speed shows up as imbalance. Rising greenhouse gases, altered albedo, chemical signatures that don't settle, a planet beginning to shout. When we compare that to the quiet competence of the occupied world, the contrast is stark. Not moral. Mechanical. One system oscillates wildly, the other dampens oscillation. And suddenly, the occupied planet stops being a curiosity and becomes a benchmark. Because benchmarks don't ask how you feel. They ask how you perform. We used to imagine advanced civilizations as louder than us, brighter, more energetic, more visible. Dyson spheres, galactic engineering, stars wrapped in machinery. That imagery made us feel small but special, like children waiting to be outclassed. This world suggests a different trajectory. Advanced systems may be harder to see, not easier. They may optimize for invisibility, not expansion, for efficiency, not excess, for longevity, not reach. If intelligence ever existed there and we still don't know if it did, it may have learned something we haven't yet, that the highest form of success is becoming indistinguishable from nature. At that point, technology wouldn't look like metal and lights. It would look like stability. From light years away, you wouldn't see monuments. You'd see balance. That idea quietly destabilizes everything we thought we were searching for. Because it means the universe could be full of advanced outcomes that look, to our instruments, like simple life. Worlds that solve the problem of existence so thoroughly they left no scars detectable across space. Worlds that didn't need to escape their gravity well to matter. That possibility reframes silence. The absence of signals isn't evidence of emptiness, it may be evidence of success. And if that's true, then shouting into space may not be the sign of maturity we assumed. It may be the sound of adolescence. We circle back to the planet James Webb found not as an alien other, but as a tutor we never ask for. It teaches without speaking. It demonstrates without explanation. It offers no instructions, only an existence that forces comparison. And comparison is dangerous, because it makes us ask whether our current trajectory converges with longevity or diverges from it. We are standing at a crossroads that planet passed long ago, one way or another. Either it never developed intelligence that externalized power, or it did and learned to restrain it, or it collapsed and recovered in a form that erased the evidence. All three possibilities point to the same lesson: persistence doesn't require dominance. And dominance doesn't guarantee persistence. This isn't a call to abandon curiosity or ambition. Those are part of what we are. But it is a reminder that curiosity without restraint becomes extraction, and ambition without feedback becomes collapse. The universe doesn't punish those failures. It simply moves on. Stars keep burning, planets keep orbiting, life keeps arising where it can. James Webb will keep watching. And in the years ahead, it will find more worlds like this one. Some will be less clear, some more dramatic, but none will undo the first shock that Earth-like planets can be fully alive without us. and that life can solve the problem of planetary stability without ever inventing us. That realization doesn't make humanity irrelevant. It makes our choices visible. We are no longer acting in a universe where failure can be blamed on cosmic cruelty or rarity. We are acting in a universe where success is demonstrably possible and quietly common. Somewhere out there, a planet continues its ancient routine. Photosynthesis, whatever form it takes, turns starlight into structure. Decomposers return matter to cycles. Atmospheres stay breathable. Oceans stay liquid. Seasons pass. No drama. No applause. Just continuity. And that continuity stretches forward, long past our current moment, long past our current fears. Whether Earth joins that category or becomes a cautionary fossil drifting through space is not written in the stars. It's written here, on a young planet that just learned it's not the first to be alive and not guaranteed to be among the longest. The occupied world doesn't demand that we change. It simply exists as proof that change is possible. And in that quiet proof, the universe hands us the most unsettling gift of all, a future that is no longer hypothetical, only conditional. That conditional future sits heavy because conditions don't negotiate. They either hold or they don't. When we look back at the occupied planet now, it no longer feels distant, not emotionally. It feels like a reference point hovering over our shoulder, quietly measuring our noise against its calm. It's not judging us. It's reminding us that planetary scale outcomes don't care about intention, ideology, or identity. They care about balance. And balance is unforgiving. Every biosphere lives on borrowed stability. Stars change, orbits drift, impacts happen, volcanism reshapes surfaces. The only reason life survives these insults is because it builds buffers redundancy layered on redundancy. When one pathway fails, another absorbs the shock. That planet has buffers. We can see them indirectly. The atmosphere doesn't swing wildly. The chemistry doesn't spike and crash. The seasonal signals are rhythmic, not erratic. This is a world that has learned how to absorb surprises. Earth learned that too. Until recently. Now we are injecting change faster than buffers can compensate. We are narrowing margins that took eons to build. We are converting resilience into fragility without fully realizing the trade we're making. And here's the uncomfortable symmetry from far away. Our planet is starting to look less alive than the occupied one. Not because life is disappearing yet, but because coherence is. The chemical signals are becoming jagged. The cycles are drifting. The noise floor is rising. If an alien telescope were watching us now, it wouldn't see civilization. It would see instability. That's not science fiction. That's spectral analysis. James Webb would notice. Which means we've crossed another invisible threshold. We are no longer just inhabitants of Earth. We are authors of its signature. We are writing a story in chemistry that will persist long after individual lives end. The occupied planet wrote its story slowly. We are writing ours in a rush. And rush leaves marks. This is where the narrative tightens, because the comparison stops being abstract. The universe isn't asking us to become like that planet. There is no single path, but it is showing us that paths diverge and some lead to longevity, while others burn bright and vanish. Civilizations, like species, exist inside selection pressures, not moral ones, physical ones, energy limits, waste accumulation, feedback delays. Those pressures don't care how intelligent you are, they care how integrated you become. Integration is the quiet hero of persistence. The occupied planet is integrated. Life, atmosphere, geology, and star form a loop. Break one link and the others compensate. That's what makes it robust. We are not integrated yet. We operate as an overlay, a fast, powerful layer that extracts and redistributes without full feedback. That can work briefly. It can even create wonders. But without integration, it destabilizes the host. This isn't destiny. It's a phase. And phases can end in more than one way. The most unsettling possibility isn't that we fail, it's that we succeed in the wrong direction. Because success measured in growth alone amplifies instability. It increases throughput, accelerates cycles, sharpens gradients. It turns planets into engines without governors. That works until it doesn't. The occupied planet suggests another metric. Success measured in duration. Measured in how long a system can keep complexity alive without collapsing its own support structures. Measured in how quietly it can exist without needing to announce itself. That's a different game. One we've barely started playing. And suddenly, the silence of the universe feels less like neglect and more like expectation. As if most worlds that last simply don't advertise. As if the cosmos is full of survivors that learn to whisper or never needed to speak at all. We're the loud ones. Still young enough to mistake volume for importance. That doesn't make us doomed. It makes us early. Early enough to change trajectory. James Webb didn't discover Earth 3.0 to warn us. Telescopes don't have motives, but discoveries have consequences whether we want them or not. This one collapses an excuse we've leaned on for generations, the idea that we're fragile exceptions in a hostile universe. We're not. We're participants in a universe that knows how to build living worlds and keep them alive. Which means failure, if it comes, will be ours. Not written into the fabric of reality. The occupied planet will keep turning regardless of what we do. Its star will rise and set. Its ecosystems will adapt. It may outlast our species by orders of magnitude without ever knowing we existed. But its impact on us has already happened. It has shifted the baseline. From now on, when we talk about the future, we do so with evidence that planetary longevity is achievable, that biospheres can endure, that balance is not a fantasy. And once you know something is achievable, not achieving it becomes a choice. That's the quiet weight this discovery places on us. Not pressure. Perspective. We are no longer asking whether life is possible elsewhere. We're asking what kind of life lasts. And as we stand on a young, noisy planet, still deciding what we want to become, the universe has offered us a glimpse not of our destiny, but of a precedent. A world already occupied, already balanced, already complete in its own way, waiting for nothing, and in that stillness, it hands us a challenge without words. Not to conquer the cosmos, not to escape our world, but to learn how to belong to one. Belonging to a world is harder than conquering one. Conquest is loud, belonging is subtle. It requires listening to feedback you didn't design, respecting limits you didn't choose, and accepting that the system you depend on does not revolve around you. That lesson sits at the core of what the occupied planet shows us not as advice, but as existence. Because that world is not frozen in perfection. It changes. Storms still tear across its surface. Volcanoes still punch through crust. Species still rise and vanish. But the system absorbs those shocks without losing itself. Disturbance happens inside boundaries. Recovery is assumed. Earth used to work that way. And then we became powerful enough to bypass boundaries faster than they could respond. The occupied planet reminds us that power is not the same as control. Control implies foresight. Power without foresight is just acceleration, and acceleration, at planetary scale, is dangerous. We tend to imagine that intelligence inevitably leads outward off-world colonies, starships, expansion across the galaxy. That story comforts us because it frames escape as a solution. If things go wrong here, we'll go somewhere else. But the occupied planet quietly dismantles that fantasy. It shows us that the most successful worlds may never leave home. Not because they can't, because they don't need to. A planet that achieves long-term equilibrium becomes a finished environment, not static but complete. There is nothing to flee from, no existential pressure pushing intelligence to spread like spores. Expansion becomes optional, not necessary. That's a radical idea. It suggests that the drive to escape a planet might be a symptom of instability, not progress, a response to systems pushed out of balance, forcing intelligence to seek relief elsewhere. If that's true, then our obsession with leaving Earth says less about destiny and more about discomfort. The occupied planet is comfortable, and comfort at planetary scale is earned. We've never really asked what intelligence looks like when it stays, when it matures inside limits instead of trying to outrun them, when it becomes an organ of the biosphere instead of an external force acting upon it. Maybe that's why the universe feels quiet. Not because no one is there, but because those who last learn that silence is efficient. Energy that isn't wasted on excess can be invested in resilience. Matter that stays in closed loops doesn't poison the system. Information that circulates locally doesn't need to be broadcast across stars to matter. The occupied planet may be full of intelligence we will never detect because detection itself isn't a priority. And that forces us to question a deeply human assumption that significance requires visibility. From a cosmic perspective, significance might be measured in how long something keeps working. Stars don't announce their wisdom, they just burn steadily. Planets don't declare success, they just keep cycling. Life doesn't ask to be noticed, it just persists. We are the ones who want witnesses. Which brings us to a subtle but profound shift in perspective. The discovery of Earth 3.0 doesn't make us feel watched. It makes us feel seen by comparison. Seen as young, seen as loud, seen as experimenting at scale without yet knowing the consequences. Seen not as villains, but as adolescents in a universe full of elders who learned long ago that survival is quieter than ambition. That doesn't mean ambition is wrong. It means ambition without integration is incomplete. We're still in the phase where we test limits to find them. That's natural. Every system does it early on, but at some point, systems that last stop testing limits and start respecting them. The occupied planet crossed that threshold. We haven't yet, and that yet matters. Because discovery changes trajectories. It doesn't dictate them, but it reshapes the landscape of choices. Before, we could pretend planetary stability was rare or fragile. Now we know it's achievable. Before, we could imagine collapse as inevitable. Now we see it as optional. That doesn't make the work easier. It makes it necessary. James Webb didn't just extend our vision outward, it compressed our excuses inward. We can no longer say, "No one knows how to do this." Somewhere, something already does. And it's doing it without us. The occupied planet is not a destination. We're not going there, not anytime soon. Its gravity well will remain untouched by our boots. Its ecosystems will never adapt to us. It will live and die on its own terms. But its existence reaches across space and time to touch us anyway. It tells us that planets can be more than stages for short-lived dramas. They can be long-form stories, unfolding over billions of years without a narrator. It tells us that life doesn't need to escape to be successful. And it tells us that intelligence, if it wants to last, must learn to belong. As we move forward, building machines smarter than us, altering genomes, reshaping climates, we're no longer acting in ignorance of alternatives. We know that quieter futures exist, that slower trajectories can outlast faster ones, that worlds can remain alive without becoming loud. That knowledge doesn't bind us, but it does watch us. The universe doesn't intervene. It observes outcomes. And somewhere under a red star, a planet keeps demonstrating silently, patiently, that another outcome is possible. Not perfect, not eternal, but stable enough to last. Whether Earth joins that category will not be decided by discovery, or technology, or ambition alone. It will be decided by whether we learn the same lesson that world seems to have learned long ago, that the highest form of intelligence is not the ability to reshape a planet, but the wisdom to know when not to, and that lesson, once seen, cannot be unseen. Once a lesson can't be unseen, It stops being abstract. It starts pressing on decisions. Because the occupied planet doesn't just sit out there as a philosophical mirror, it quietly reframes what advanced even means. For most of our history, advancement meant control over nature. Fire, agriculture, industry, computation. Each step pulled us further out of the systems that shaped us, giving us leverage but also distance. Distance is power. Distance is also blindness. The farther you stand from feedback, the longer it takes consequences to reach you. By the time they do, they arrive amplified. That's what we're experiencing now, not punishment, not cosmic irony, but delayed feedback finally catching up to speed. The occupied planet appears to have never let that gap grow. Life there didn't separate itself from regulation. It became regulation. Every gain in complexity came with tighter coupling to the environment. Energy capture increased, but so did recycling. Diversity grew, but redundancy grew faster. Risk was distributed. That's how you survive for eons. Not by avoiding change, but by metabolizing it. We've done the opposite. We've localized benefits and globalized costs. We've built systems that reward speed over stability, extraction over integration. That works brilliantly right up until it doesn't. And now, with evidence that another way exists, we're forced into an unfamiliar position. We can no longer claim ignorance. This is the moment where cosmic awe collapses into responsibility. Because the universe just told us something important. Without words, without judgment, longevity is not mysterious. It is procedural. It follows rules. Rules that can be learned. Or ignored. That's why this discovery feels heavier than any alien signal ever could. A signal can be dismissed, interpreted, argued over, but a living planet, quietly persisting, is harder to negotiate with. It doesn't persuade, it demonstrates. And demonstrations stick. Think about what future generations will inherit, not just technologically, but narratively. For the first time, humanity knows that Earth-like worlds can be fully alive elsewhere, that our planet is not a singular fluke, that failure is not preordained. Children born after this discovery will grow up in a universe that feels fuller, more crowded, more demanding. They won't ask, "Are we alone the way we did?" They'll ask, "How do we compare?" Comparison changes everything. It changes how we define success. It changes what we admire. It changes what we tolerate. A civilization that destabilizes its only home now looks less like a tragic hero and more like a poor student ignoring available examples. That's not an accusation. It's a reframing. And reframings alter trajectories. We don't need to copy the occupied planet. We couldn't, even if we tried. Different star, different chemistry, different history. But we can extract the invariant lesson, the one that applies across worlds, across biologies. Integration beats domination. Feedback beats force. Longevity beats spectacle. Those aren't moral statements, they're survival traits. And the universe appears to select for them. This is where the story tightens towards something uncomfortable but necessary. Because if longevity is selectable, then extinction is not just an accident, it's a failure to integrate fast enough, a mismatch between power and wisdom, a system that outruns its own corrections. That's not a verdict. It's a warning. And warnings only matter if they arrive in time. James Webb may have found this planet at exactly the right moment, not in cosmic time, but in ours. A moment when our tools have outpaced our restraint, when our influence has become planetary, but our thinking is still local, still short-term. The occupied planet stands as proof that planetary-scale thinking is possible. Not easy, but possible. It shows us a version of success that doesn't involve escape pods or galactic footprints. A version where staying put is not stagnation, but mastery. Where the goal is not to transcend nature, but to align with it so completely that the distinction dissolves. That idea used to feel small. Now it feels vast. because it expands the definition of intelligence beyond cleverness, beyond invention, beyond dominance. It includes patience, restraint, systems thinking across millennia, traits we rarely celebrate, traits that don't trend, but traits that last. Somewhere under that red star, the occupied planet continues to do nothing remarkable by our standards. It doesn't signal, it doesn't expand, it doesn't announce its existence. It simply keeps going. And in doing so, it quietly rewrites the stakes of our own story. We are no longer the protagonists of a silent universe. We are one experiment among many. Young, powerful, undecided. The next chapters of our story will not be shaped by whether we find more worlds like that one we will. They will be shaped by whether we learn from them without ever touching them. Because the deepest discoveries don't always give us new places to go. Sometimes they tell us how to stay. And that may be the hardest lesson of all. Staying sounds simple, it isn't. Staying means committing to consequences that unfold slower than a human lifetime. It means designing systems that work not just when we're watching them, but when we're gone. It means caring about outcomes we will never personally experience. For a species wired for immediacy, that's an unnatural act. And yet, the occupied planet proves it can be done. Not by intention, by iteration. That world didn't decide to become stable, it failed into stability. Countless configurations didn't work. Countless feedback loops snapped. The ones that survived were the ones that closed cycles, dampened extremes, and avoided runaway growth. Over time, the planet filtered itself. Selection didn't happen only at the level of organisms. It happened at the level of systems. That's the part we tend to miss. We focus on species, not architectures. But what survives longest isn't just a creature. It's a way of organizing matter and energy that resists collapse. On Earth, forests are such architectures. So are coral reefs. So is the global carbon cycle when it's left intact. These are not fragile things. They've survived asteroid impacts, ice ages, mass extinctions. What they haven't evolved to survive is a force that changes conditions faster than adaptation can respond. That force is us. Which makes the comparison with the occupied planet uncomfortable in a very specific way. It suggests that intelligence is not automatically selected for a planetary scale. Intelligence without integration may be a destabilizing mutation, brilliant locally, destructive globally. If that's true, then civilizations are not guaranteed outcomes of life. They are risky experiments. Some may integrate and persist. Some may burn bright and end. And the universe keeps the score in silence. This reframes the idea of the great filter in a way we didn't expect. Maybe the filter isn't behind us, in the improbability of life or intelligence. Maybe it's ahead of us, in the difficulty of learning how to stay within bounds once you gain the power to break them. The occupied planet appears to have passed that filter either by never developing destabilizing intelligence, or by developing it and surviving the transition. We don't know which, but both options imply restraint. And restraint at scale is rare. That's why this discovery doesn't feel like a celebration. It feels like a checkpoint, a moment where the universe quietly asks, what kind of experiment are you going to be? We've always imagined the future as expansion, colonies, terraforming, humanity spreading outward, leaving footprints on every world it touches. That narrative made sense when we thought life was rare and space was empty. But if space is already full of living systems, if planets are already occupied by their own long-running stories, then expansion stops being heroic and starts being invasive. The occupied planet forces us to confront that shift. It doesn't invite us. It doesn't need us. It already works. So what does growth look like in a crowded universe? Maybe it looks inward. Maybe it looks like depth instead of reach, complexity without sprawl, intelligence focused on understanding and stewardship rather than extraction and escape. That's not a retreat. It's maturation. And maturation is harder than conquest because it offers fewer rewards in the short term. No flags, no firsts, no dramatic turning points, just sustained attention to balance. The occupied planet had billions of years to practice that. We've had centuries. And now, with our tools amplifying our impact faster than our wisdom, the gap between power and integration has never been wider. This is where the narrative tightens towards something personal. Because every technology we build now, every AI system, every energy network, every climate intervention, either moves us closer to integration or pushes us further away from it. There is no neutral choice anymore. At planetary scale, everything couples. The occupied planet didn't get to choose when life emerged, but it did, in a sense, choose which patterns persisted. The ones that closed loops survived, the ones that didn't vanished. We're approaching a similar inflection point, except we're conscious of it. That's new. And consciousness changes the stakes. We can see the feedback loops, we can model them, we can choose to slow ourselves down, or we can choose to outrun our own understanding and hope something else absorbs the shock. Hope is not a strategy. The universe doesn't reward hope. It rewards coherence. That's the quiet lesson encoded in the atmosphere of a distant world. Coherence between energy input and waste output, between growth and regulation, between change and recovery. Coherence doesn't look impressive. It looks boring, until you realize it lasts. And suddenly, the occupied planet stops feeling alien and starts feeling aspirational, not because we want to be like it, but because it proves that a living world can reach a state where drama is no longer necessary for survival. Drama is expensive. Stability is efficient. As James Webb continues to collect photons from that distant sky, it will refine the picture, more data, tighter constraints, but the core message is already locked in. No future observation will make that world empty again. We now live in a universe where Earth-like planets can be fully alive without us. And that changes how we must think about our own. Because if longevity is possible elsewhere, then the future is no longer something that happens to us. It's something we have to earn. Not through expansion, not through dominance, but through learning, finally, how to stay. The occupied planet isn't waiting for us to catch up. It doesn't care if we do. But in its quiet persistence, it has already given us a standard, and once a standard exists, the only question left is whether we rise to meet it, or learn too late why we didn't. And the universe, as always, will not comment. It will simply keep watching. Watching is what the universe does best. It doesn't rush. It doesn't intervene. It lets systems reveal themselves over time, confident that patterns will emerge if you wait long enough. James Webb is an extension of that patience, a machine built to sit quietly and collect light, to let reality speak at its own pace. And what reality is saying now is subtle, but unmistakable. The occupied planet isn't an anomaly screaming for explanation. It's a data point settling into a curve that bends away from emptiness and toward persistence. The more we stare at it, the less extraordinary it feels and the more consequential that becomes. Because extraordinary things can be dismissed. Ordinary ones redefine expectations. This planet is extraordinary only in how unremarkable its success appears. It doesn't glow with excess energy. It doesn't leak waste heat. It doesn't broadcast. It simply maintains conditions suitable for life. Year after year, epoch after epoch. That's not flashy. That's competence. And competence at planetary scale is rare enough to matter. We're used to thinking of evolution as a story of winners and losers, of competition and conquest. But zoom out far enough, and a different metric emerges. Systems that last aren't the most aggressive, they're the most compatible with their environment. They don't maximize short-term gain, they optimize for continuity. The occupied planet has continuity. We can infer it from what isn't happening. No runaway greenhouse, no atmospheric collapse, no chemical imbalance screaming of recent catastrophe, just a steady-state hum, punctuated by seasonal rhythms. That steadiness implies memory. Not memory in the human sense, but systemic memory structures shaped by past disturbances that make future disturbances less lethal. Forests that regrow after fires, oceans that buffer temperature swings, soils that store nutrients against scarcity. Memory encoded in matter. We have that memory too. Or we did. Earth's biosphere is full of it. Coral reefs that survived ancient warming events. Forests adapted to drought cycles. Ice sheets that waxed and waned over millennia. Those systems didn't just appear. They were earned through long negotiation with physics. Our danger isn't that we lack resilience. It's that we're erasing it faster than we understand it. And here's where the occupied planet becomes more than a symbol. It becomes a measuring stick, a way to ask whether our trajectory increases systemic memory or wipes it clean. Every species that ever went extinct took some memory with it. Every ecosystem collapse erased a solution that had worked under specific conditions. Those losses matter more now because we're compressing time. We're stacking disturbances closer together, not giving systems room to learn. The occupied planet had room. That's the gift of time. Time to fail slowly. Time to adapt. Time to select for configurations that don't just survive shocks, but expect them. We don't have that luxury anymore. But we have something it never did. Awareness. We can see the whole system. We can model feedbacks. We can choose restraint deliberately, rather than stumbling into it through extinction. That's unprecedented. No biosphere before us has had a species capable of understanding planetary scale consequences in advance. That capability is our test. Not whether we can build powerful technologies, but whether we can integrate them without overwhelming the systems that support us. The occupied planet didn't invent ethics. It invented balance. Ethics, for us, are the translation of balance into choice. And that translation is hard. Because balance doesn't offer simple victories. It asks for trade-offs. It demands that some possibilities remain unrealized, that some growth curves flatten, that some ambitions be redirected rather than fulfilled. That feels like loss. But from a planetary perspective, it's preservation. We're standing at a moment where that distinction matters more than ever. Climate systems are shifting. Biodiversity is thinning. Feedback loops we once relied on are weakening. The noise in Earth's signal is increasing. And now, we know what quiet looks like elsewhere. That knowledge doesn't condemn us. It contextualizes us. We are not the first life to shape a planet. But we may be the first to understand what that shaping entails before it's too late. That's the difference between tragedy and responsibility. The occupied planet doesn't show us a utopia. It shows us a working solution, one that likely emerged through pain, collapse, and recovery, one that lost countless forms along the way, but one that, in the end, stabilized. We can't copy that path, but we can learn from its outcome. The universe isn't hostile to life, it's demanding of coherence. Worlds that achieve coherence persist, worlds that don't become geological footnotes. This isn't destiny. It's selection. And selection doesn't care about narratives we tell ourselves. It cares about whether inputs and outputs balance over time. As Webb keeps watching, the occupied planet will continue to offer no commentary, no confirmation, no warning lights, just data. And that data, quietly accumulating, is already doing its work. It's shrinking the space of denial. It's reframing collapse as optional. It's making longevity visible. That visibility changes what it means to be intelligent. Not clever enough to manipulate the world, but wise enough to let the world keep working. We are still early enough to choose. That's the fragile, fleeting advantage of being young in a universe full of elders. The occupied planet doesn't need us to notice it. But now that we have, it has placed us under a different kind of scrutiny. Not from it. From ourselves. Because when the universe finally shows you that survival is possible at planetary scale, The only remaining mystery is whether you will take the hint or insist on learning the hard way, why others lasted longer than you did. And that question is no longer theoretical. It's already in motion. That motion is quiet, but it's relentless. It doesn't wait for consensus. It doesn't pause for debate. It unfolds whether we argue about it or not, because planetary processes don't care about agreement. They respond to inputs. They adjust to pressures. They settle into new equilibria, or they don't. The occupied planet settled. And the more we sit with that fact, the more radical it becomes. Because settlement is not stasis. It's not a frozen end state. It's a dynamic truce between forces that would otherwise tear a world apart: heat and cold, growth and decay, innovation and extinction. On that planet, none of those forces won completely. They learn to coexist. That coexistence is visible in the atmosphere, in the way gases rise and fall but never spiral, in the way energy arrives from the star and leaves as infrared without overheating the surface, in the way chemistry cycles instead of accumulating poison. It's a world that learned how to say enough. That word is uncomfortable for us. We don't like ceilings. We don't like limits. We associate them with failure, with stagnation, with lost potential. But the occupied planet reframes limits as enablers, boundaries that allow complexity to persist without self-destruction. Without limits, systems don't become infinite. They become unstable. And instability doesn't look dramatic at first. It looks like success. Growth curves rising, energy use climbing, possibilities multiplying. Only later does it reveal itself as fragility systems stretch thin, buffers eroded, recovery times lengthening. We are in that later phase now, which is why this discovery lands when it does, with the weight it does, not as a warning shouted from the sky, but as a calm example that contradicts our instincts. The universe didn't need to scare us. It just needed to show us something that works. That's often more unsettling. Because fear can be resisted, examples cannot. We keep circling back to intelligence because we want it to matter. We want consciousness to be the axis on which everything turns. But the occupied planet keeps whispering a different truth. Intelligence only matters if it aligns with the systems that support it. Otherwise, it's noise. That's a hard pill to swallow for a species that prides itself on cleverness. But cleverness without coherence is temporary. It burns through options faster than it creates them. On that world, options remained open for millions of years. That's not because nothing happened. It's because too much didn't happen at once. The pacing was right. Pacing is invisible in short timelines. You only see it when you zoom out far enough to watch entire epochs breathe. James Webb gives us that zoom. It collapses deep time into data, letting us glimpse what patient success looks like. And patient success doesn't look heroic. It looks quiet. It looks boring. It looks like nothing changing fast enough to notice. Until you realize how much time has passed without collapse. That's when boredom turns into war. Because in a universe defined by entropy, holding a complex system together for billions of years is a triumph of organization. The occupied planet achieved that without ever knowing we existed. Which means this isn't about them. It's about us catching up to reality. We've been telling ourselves a story where intelligence inevitably leads to transcendence, leaving planets behind, mastering environments, bending physics to will. That story flatters us. It gives our struggles cosmic meaning. But it may be incomplete. There may be another story, older and quieter, where intelligence, if it survives, learns when not to act, when to let systems regulate themselves, when to intervene gently instead of forcefully. That kind of intelligence wouldn't dominate the planet. It would disappear into it. And from a distance, it would look exactly like what James Webb sees now, a stable, breathing world with no obvious signs of control. That's a humbling thought, because it suggests that the endgame of intelligence is not visibility, it's invisibility. Not absence, but seamlessness. We don't know if the occupied planet ever reached that point. We don't know if intelligence emerged there at all, but the outcome planetary stability stands on its own. Outcomes matter more than intentions. And that's why this discovery keeps pressing inward, past awe, past wonder, into something sharper. Responsibility. Not cosmic responsibility, not destiny, just responsibility for the only system we directly influence. Earth. We are shaping it whether we intend to or not. Every decision, every technology, every delay nudges feedback loops in one direction or another. We are already a planetary force. The only question is whether we become a stabilizing one or a destabilizing one. The occupied planet doesn't tell us what to do. It tells us what is possible. And possibility is dangerous because it removes excuses. We can no longer say, no world can stay stable forever. Maybe not forever, but long enough to matter. We can no longer say, life always destroys its environment. Not always, not inevitably. We can no longer say, this is just how it goes. The universe has shown us another way it can go. That doesn't mean we're doomed if we fail. It means we're accountable if we don't try. James Webb will continue to observe. It will refine measurements, reduce uncertainties, sharpen models. Over time, the occupied planet will become less mysterious and more familiar. Familiarity will dull the shock. But it shouldn't dull the lesson. Because the lesson isn't in the novelty. It's in the persistence. Long after the headlines fade, long after the discovery becomes textbook material, that planet will still be there cycling, regulating, enduring, and Earth will still be deciding what kind of world it wants to be. That decision won't be made all at once. It will be made incrementally, invisibly, through policies, technologies, values, and delays, through what we prioritize and what we ignore, through whether we treat limits as enemies or allies. The universe doesn't care which story we choose, but it has shown us that some stories last longer than others. And once you know that, you don't get to pretend you're writing in the dark anymore. The light has already arrived. Quietly. From a planet that never asked to be found. Already occupied. Already alive. Already showing us, without words, what survival at planetary scale actually looks like. What we do with that knowledge is the only unanswered question left. That unanswered question doesn't hang in the air like suspense. It sinks. It becomes gravity. Because once you realize you're no longer writing in the dark, every choice gains weight, not symbolic weight, physical weight, consequences measured in altered cycles, delayed feedback, accumulated change, the kind of weight planets feel. The occupied planet feels that weight too. It just learned how to distribute it. That's the core distinction we keep circling: distribution versus concentration. On that world, energy flows are spread, risks are shared. No single pathway dominates long enough to become catastrophic. Diversity isn't just biological, it's structural. Many ways to do the same thing, so failure never means collapse. Earth used to have that. We are compressing it. We've simplified food webs, centralized energy systems, narrowed genetic diversity, accelerated supply chains until a disruption in one place ripples everywhere. Efficiency replaced redundancy, speed replaced resilience. From a human perspective, that looks like progress. From a planetary perspective, it looks like fragility. The occupied planet reminds us that resilience is not inefficient. It's expensive up front and invaluable later. It's what allows a system to absorb shocks without rewriting itself violently. And here's the part that rarely gets said out loud. Intelligence tends to optimize for local efficiency, not global resilience. It solves the problem right in front of it, often by externalizing costs. That works until the costs circle back. We are living in the return phase, which is why this discovery feels less like science and more like context arriving late. Not too late, but later than comfortable. If James Webb had found this planet 1,000 years ago, it would have been meaningless to us. We lack the power to act on the lesson. 100 years ago, it would have been a curiosity. Now, it lands at a moment when our influence is already planetary, whether we like it or not. Timing matters. The universe didn't deliver this example randomly. It delivered it when we became capable of understanding it and responsible enough to be judged by it. Not judged by aliens. Judged by outcomes. The occupied planet doesn't care if we feel inspired or threatened. It doesn't care if we mythologize it or forget it. Its role in our story is already complete. It existed. We saw it. The rest is on us. And that's where the narrative tightens towards something uncomfortable but grounding. We don't need to become quieter because the universe demands it. We need to become quieter because stability demands it. There's a difference. Quiet is not silence. It's signal-to-noise ratio. It's systems speaking clearly to themselves instead of drowning in feedback they can't process. It's knowing when to amplify and when to dampen. The occupied planet is not silent. It's articulate. Its atmosphere is a language of balance. Its seasons are sentences. Its chemistry is a long conversation between life and physics that hasn't broken down. We are still shouting over our own signals. And shouting feels powerful until you realize you can't hear what matters. One of the most dangerous myths we've carried is that intelligence naturally leads to mastery. That if we're clever enough, we can always engineer our way out of trouble. But engineering without patience is just acceleration. And acceleration widens the gap between action and consequence. The occupied planet narrowed that gap. It kept feedback tight. Changes were felt quickly, corrected early. That's how you avoid runaway processes. That's how you stay alive long enough to matter. Earth's feedback loops are loosening. Not gone, but strained. Which means the window for gentle correction is closing. This is where cosmic awe turns into a kind of sober resolve. Because the universe has shown us that collapse is not inevitable, but it is easy. Stability is possible, but it is earned. And earning it requires doing something counterintuitive for an intelligent species. Slowing down. Not stopping. Not retreating. Slowing enough to listen. Listening to systems that don't speak in words but in trends, thresholds, and delays. Listening to oceans warming by fractions of degrees, to species declining quietly, to cycles stretching beyond their historical bounds. The occupied planet listened early because life there was the system. There was no separation between observer and observed. We created that separation. Now we have to undo it. That doesn't mean giving up technology. It means aiming technology inward toward coherence rather than conquest, toward repairing feedback loops rather than overriding them, toward making our presence less destabilizing, not more impressive. That's a different kind of ambition, one that won't trend well, one that won't feel heroic in the moment, but one that might let our planet join the quiet category. Not famous, not dominant, just alive a very long time. The occupied planet doesn't promise us a future. It shows us a shape of survival that doesn't require expansion, extraction, or escape. A shape defined by cycles closing, extremes dampening, diversity protecting against failure. We can approximate that shape, or we can ignore it. The universe will not intervene either way. It will simply record the outcome. And one day, long after our debates fade, long after our satellites decay, long after our languages disappear, Earth's atmosphere will tell its own story to any distant observer patient enough to listen. The question is what that story will say. Will it speak of a brief, noisy phase that destabilized itself and passed, or of a turbulent adolescence that learned restraint and settled into a long, quiet adulthood? The occupied planet suggests adulthood is possible. Not glamorous, not dramatic, but durable. And durability, in a universe measured in billions of years, is the closest thing there is to success. We are not being asked to become something alien. We are being asked to grow up, Not by the universe, by the evidence. And evidence once seen doesn't let go. It just waits to see what you do next. Growing up, at planetary scale, doesn't come with a ceremony. There's no clear moment when a civilization crosses from adolescence into maturity. No announcement, no cosmic signal. It happens gradually, unevenly, through 1,000 decisions that don't feel historic while they're being made, through what we choose to preserve, through what we decide is enough, through which feedback we respect and which ones we silence. The occupied planet didn't wake up one day and decide to be stable. It accumulated wisdom in the only way systems can, by surviving their own mistakes. The difference is that its mistakes unfolded slowly enough for correction. Its failures were local before they became global. Its collapses were partial, not terminal. That pacing gave life time to respond, to diversify, to build redundancy instead of racing toward efficiency. We don't have that luxury anymore. Our mistakes propagate instantly. A decision in one place reshapes systems everywhere. Energy, information, material, everything moves at near-light speed compared to the rhythms that shaped our planet. We've compressed centuries of change into decades, millennia into generations. That compression is the defining feature of our moment. And it's why this discovery matters now. Because the occupied planet shows us what happens when change unfolds at the pace of systems, not ambitions. It reveals an outcome shaped by patience rather than urgency. Not because urgency never existed, but because it never dominated long enough to destabilize the whole. Earth is testing whether urgency can be restrained once it becomes profitable. That's a harder test than surviving asteroid impacts or ice ages. Those are external shocks. This is an internal one. And internal shocks are always more dangerous. We like to think intelligence gives us control, but control is an illusion when feedback arrives delayed and amplified. True control isn't about forcing outcomes, it's about shaping conditions so that desirable outcomes emerge naturally. The occupied planet mastered conditions. We are still forcing outcomes. That's why the future feels unstable. Not doomed, but sensitive. Balanced on decisions that don't feel dramatic, yet compound relentlessly. Infrastructure choices, energy pathways, land use, information systems, AI governance, climate intervention. Each one nudges feedback loops toward dampening or amplification. None of them alone will decide the outcome. Together, they already are. The occupied planet doesn't offer a blueprint. It offers a proof of concept. Proof that a living world can reach a state where complexity and stability reinforce each other rather than compete. That reframes hope. Hope is no longer about finding salvation elsewhere. It's about aligning ourselves with processes that already know how to last. We've been obsessed with beginnings, origins of life, origins of intelligence, first contact, first steps beyond Earth. Beginnings are exciting because they feel open-ended, but endurance doesn't happen at beginnings. It happens after the novelty fades, after the easy gains are taken, after the system either learns to regulate itself or doesn't. The occupied planet is long past its beginning. That's why it feels calm. And calm, from our perspective, feels empty. We mistake lack of spectacle for lack of significance, but significance at cosmic scale. Cruise quietly. 1 billion years of stability outweighs 1,000 years of brilliance. That's not a value judgment. It's arithmetic. We are still addicted to brilliance, to breakthroughs, to disruption, to scaling faster than anyone else. Those instincts carried us far, but they are poorly suited for the phase we've entered. The phase where our actions ripple through every system we depend on. At that scale, disruption is indistinguishable from damage. And the occupied planet stands as a silent rebuttal to the idea that disruption is synonymous with progress. Progress there looked like refinement, like tuning, like learning how to reduce variance rather than increase it, how to let cycles close instead of pushing them open. That kind of progress doesn't create legends. It creates longevity. One day, far in the future, if Earth survives long enough, we may look back at this moment as the inflection point not because of any single decision, but because of a shift in what we admired, when endurance began to matter more than speed, when resilience began to outrank growth, when belonging to a planet became more important than escaping it. We are not there yet, but we're close enough to see the alternative. And seeing alternatives changes behaviour, even when we resist it. James Webb didn't give us instructions, it gave us context, a wider frame in which our actions can no longer hide behind ignorance, a universe where stable biospheres exist, quietly proving that chaos is not the only outcome. That knowledge doesn't compel us, it challenges us. Because the occupied planet doesn't look like a warning. It looks like a future that didn't need to invent us to succeed. And that's humbling in a way no alien message could ever be. Aliens could threaten us. This threatens our self-image. It suggests that the universe doesn't center intelligence. It centers persistence. Intelligence is optional. Persistence is not. And persistence doesn't care how clever you are. It cares how well your systems fit together, how little waste accumulates, how quickly feedback is felt and corrected, how gently you extract from the systems that sustain you. We can learn those things. Or we can keep telling ourselves stories where maturity always comes later, somewhere else, under different conditions. But the occupied planet removes the comfort of postponement. It says this is doable, this exists, this works. Right now, somewhere else is already living the outcome we are still debating. And that realization settles into something steady, not fear, not hope, but resolve. Resolve to stop pretending that planetary stability is a fantasy. Resolve to treat Earth not as a stepping stone, but as a long-term partner. Resolve to accept that growing up, at planetary scale, means choosing restraint even when excess is easier. The universe won't reward us for trying. It will reward us for succeeding. Quietly. Over time. Just like the world under a red star that never asked to be found, never needed to be seen, and yet now stands as one of the most important discoveries we've ever made, not because it answered our questions, but because it stripped away our excuses. One message remains. Not shouted. Not explained. Just present. Longevity is possible. The rest is on us. We end where we began, not with discovery, but with perspective. Because once the noise fades, once the awe settles into something quieter, what remains is not shock, but orientation. A sense of where we stand in a universe that no longer feels empty, no longer feels tailored to us, and no longer feels obliged to explain itself. The occupied planet continues to turn. Its star rises and sets on landscapes we will never see. Its atmosphere breathes in rhythms that predate our history and will likely outlast it. Its biosphere, whatever form it takes, keeps doing what life does best, when left enough time maintaining itself against chaos. No announcement, no signal, no need, and that is the final stabilizing truth this discovery delivers. The universe does not require witnesses to function. Meaning does not require attention. Success does not require recognition. We have spent so long asking whether we matter that we forgot to ask a more important question: what kind of mattering lasts? The occupied planet answers without speaking. It matters because it persists, because it solved the problem of being a world and then kept solving it, day after day, epoch after epoch, without escalating its footprint, without exhausting its foundation. That kind of success doesn't look dramatic from a distance. It looks like nothing happening. And nothing happening, at planetary scale, is everything going right. We often imagine the universe as a place of constant violence collisions, explosions, extinctions, and that's true, in part. But survival has always been quieter than destruction. Creation whispers while collapse screams. What lasts rarely advertises itself. Earth is still deciding which side of that contrast it will occupy. We are still young enough to mistake intensity for importance, still early enough to believe that louder futures are better futures, still close enough to our breakthroughs that we confuse acceleration with direction. But the universe has now shown us a counterexample. A world that did not race. A biosphere that did not burn itself out, proving it existed. A planet that reached a state where the most remarkable thing about it is how unremarkable it looks. Already occupied. Already complete in its own way. And that forces the final reframing. This was never a story about aliens. It was a story about maturity. About what happens after the thrill of emergence, after the novelty of power, after the first century where everything feels possible and nothing feels permanent. That phase is intoxicating, but it's also dangerous. Every system that lasts must eventually choose continuity over novelty. The occupied planet made that choice, whether consciously or not. We haven't yet, but we are close enough to see the fork in the road. One path leads outward faster, louder, more extractive, more impressive in the short term. A path where we treat planets as fuel and futures as temporary. A path that assumes we can always move on before consequences arrive. The other path leads inward toward integration, restraint, coherence. A path where intelligence becomes a stabilizing force rather than a disruptive one. Where technology exists to reduce variance, not amplify it. Where success is measured in how little breaks, not how much is built. Neither path is guaranteed. Neither is easy. But only one aligns with what we now know is possible. And that knowledge changes everything. We can no longer claim that planetary stability is a myth. We have seen it. We can no longer say that life inevitably destroys its home. We have evidence otherwise. We can no longer insist that intelligence must culminate in expansion or dominance. The universe has offered a quieter alternative. It didn't offer it as a command. It offered it as context. James Webb did not discover Earth 3.0 to inspire us. It discovered it because that world exists. An existence, once revealed, reshapes the landscape of choice. We are no longer alone in being alive. But more importantly, we are no longer alone in knowing what survival can look like. Somewhere under a red sun, a planet continues its long, patient work. It does not rush. It does not announce milestones. It does not wonder whether it matters. It just keeps going. And in doing so, it hands us the final, unsettling gift of perspective. The universe is not waiting for us to arrive. It is waiting to see whether we learn how to stay. Small, included, awed but no longer confused. We are witnesses now, not to an empty cosmos, but to a universe where life has already learned how to last. What we do with that lesson will not echo loudly across the stars. It will echo quietly, here, over time, in the only place where our choices truly matter, on a planet that is, for now, still ours to keep alive.